If you want news and rumors that appeal, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. If you want news and rumors.
Hey, welcome back to the Dusty Wheel. I'm your host, the Innkeeper, and this is our live call-in talk show all about the Wheel of Time. Tonight is an episode of Robert Jordan's Notes, and I can't wait to get into that. But before we do, I want to remind you that next Watt Wednesday, we're back with our Great Wheel of Time Meme-Off Challenge. Yes, it's the Great Watt Meme Challenge. It's the finals. We've gone through over 200 memes that you've submitted to us, and we've gotten them down to, I think, somewhere below 20 at this point. And we're going to have the Way of the Leaf folks from the Way of the Leaf YouTube channel with us. And they're going to judge those with us and you live. We can't wait to do that and pick a winner and give that winner a little gift. So please be back with us next Watt Wednesday. But tonight, of course, you're here to talk about Robert Jordan's Notes. So without further ado, let me bring my guests into the show. Linda and Terez, how are you both doing tonight?
Hi.
Pretty well, thanks.
Awesome. It's great to see your faces. I mean, I was just staring at your faces before as we were talking before the show began. But I'm grateful to have you back here with us talking about all about the notes. And for those who've never seen one of these episodes before, we're talking about the notes that are at the College of Charleston Special Collections. There's an inventory of, I guess in this case it would be James Oliver Rigney Jr., but it's his works. I think, what was the years? Between 1905 and 2012 is what you can find there. And we're going to be talking about a portion of those notes tonight. And this episode happens to be a little bit special because we reached out to fans. What was it? Was it back in August?
It was a good couple of months ago, yeah.
It was back in August. We reached out to fans and asked them to send us questions. So we've gone through those questions. We're going to cover a bunch of those tonight. Honestly, we can't get through every single question that you've sent us. We'll continue to do these episodes. We'll continue to tackle some questions. But I thought it was appropriate, as we talked about this, to start with this first question. So let's put this first question up for fans to see it. This is from Zafino on Reddit. Asked, I can't remember off the top of my head, but aren't there notes that are supposed to be sealed and not released after a specific amount of time? I want to know what information was sealed. So let's try to give you some context here. This is what basically can be found in the index. Everything that you can find at the special collections for his notes are restricted in some form or fashion. And here's the 3 ways that they're restricted. Let's kind of go through those. As you see this top portion, usage restricted is materials in this series may not be duplicated, photographed, or published without explicit permission from the donor. And it says, please contact the repository for details. This applies to all of the notes files that we're going to discuss. And as we remarked right here, we have to abide by fair use restrictions for everything. And this also applies to all audiovisual material. The second restriction, for those kind of curious, is materials in this subseries are closed to researchers except with explicit permission from the donor until September 13th, 2037. And if you look here, we can kind of go through some of these. Taylor, go ahead and throw the next page up because you can see some that are probably more relevant to those of you here, which is the Wheel of Time from 1984 and 1991 to 2009, Box 66, Folder 1, and Infinity of Heaven 2004, 2009, Box 66, Folder 2. We don't exactly know what's in those, as far as I know. Is that correct, Terez? Like, that's pretty much restricted till that date of 2037, or have we had access to some of those?
I would guess that it's mostly contracts, because otherwise there would be no reason to keep them until that time. So that's what they're keeping is sensitive stuff like contracts and correspondence, personal stuff. So they set a date that they knew was going to be past Harriet's lifespan. And
Gotcha.
so that, none of, some of it might be considered embarrassing personal details, they don't want to talk about how much money he was paid,
Sure.
stuff like that. So that's my guess.
Yeah, and I know part of this, the three of us have talked about this many times, which is we kind of speculate that there are some notes here that maybe aren't listed in those access whatever listed on the index, having to do with the end of the books. Because if I remember correctly, the notes that we have access to only go through Knife of Dreams. Is that correct? Like, we don't have access to notes that go through A Gathering Storm, A Memory of Light, as part of that group. So we think there might be some notes that I think I've heard Brandon mention before, various times, that there's some things that we just haven't seen yet. So unfortunately, to answer your go ahead.
I was just going to say that from the looks of it, those things aren't even listed on the index.
Yeah.
So, it might be like so super secret that they can't even put it on the index. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't.
It's 13th depository stuff in the Whitetower Library.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, and that's the reason why I wanted to kind of cover this first was the answers that we have only cover the notes that we can access at this point. So there may be answers to your questions that are in some notes somewhere that someday in the future we'll have. So that's to give some people hope if we don't have answers to your question. So that being said, let's jump into this first topic, which I don't know. I loved this question. Let's see what this fan asked. This is from Absurdity Everywhere from Reddit. Asked, was Oliver originally meant to be Guidel Kane? I believe that RJ always denied that when asked, but it seems too perfect for it to not have been meant to be. Before we jump into the answer to that, was it something that both of you believed to be true before you found out it was not true? I see that,
No.
Terez, you check your head, you're like, no, never believed it.
No, because Guidel Kane he would be an infant or a very young boy. And Oliver is obviously 8, so no, it's not 8 years.
But okay, so that's what I imagined. Now I want to say that what we found in the notes, at least for me, this one made me laugh a little bit. So let's see this. This first quote is from the Brigitta file. It's untitled. Heroes bound to the wheel of time. This one thing that Brigitta has lost from Tel'aran'rhiod is the ability to recognize a hero bound to the wheel. It is possible that there are heroes bound who have been spun out into the world, but she would not know them if they were right in front of her. There may be other heroes bound to the wheel who have been born besides Rand al'Thor, and Guidel Kane, of course, who is somewhere as an infant or small boy. They did not congregate. Check that. An infant or small boy. I just love that he said small boy there. A lot of people would say that he meant maybe like a 2 or 3 year old, but he did include that. So
yes, small as in young, not small as in small stature.
Right, exactly. But you don't know exactly what he meant there, and so because a lot of fans took this other kind of quote that I want to post here, and Taylor, go ahead and throw the second quote up here, was an answer that Robert Jordan gave when he was asked, "Is Oliver Guidel Kane it was in a signing report from 2003?" He said, "No, I didn't really think this would last as long as it has. The timing is wrong. He has another reason for being there besides being a red herring." Though, and the question was, he's too old? And he said, yes, time in Tel'aran'rhiod and the real world run at different rates, but it never runs backwards. You may spend an hour in Tel'aran'rhiod and a day has passed when you get back. Or you may spend a day and an hour has passed when you get back, but you'll never go in on a Tuesday and come back on Monday. So does it feel to you, like, Terez, like he kind of refined this idea about Guidel Kane? Or do you think the notes of the small boy thing was just kind of like, I'm not really
sure.
relevant?
I think the leeway that he gave himself was the question of when the soul enters the body. And he was asked that question also, and he said that it was at fetus viability, so before birth. So, but I don't know. I think that must have been, though, the leeway that he was giving in his head. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and for those that are watching, if there are any incorrect citations here in the notes, we made some adjustments here at the end. So if you see anything and it doesn't match up with the index, we'll make sure we post all of the answers and their citations and locations from the index, just so if you do go looking for these answers that you can find them too. Just want to note that. But yeah, I think he did give himself some room, and like you said, maybe he kind of refined it later on. But I thought it was funny that he opened up small boy there. I don't know. We've always been talking about this, like Guidel Kane can't be Oliver. And
he's never described an 8-year-old as a small boy, though. They're usually considered just boys.
That's true. Yeah, for sure. And
I'm reading it in the spirit that it's written rather than in the actual letter, like you Theorylanders.
Yeah, no. That's what I'm saying is time would have had to have gone backwards a little bit for him to be a small boy.
And he's right when he said that Oliver he was there for another reason. He was there for 2 reasons, really, to be the hornblower, but also to that whole thing about Matt going away to the Finns and him winning the game and handing the letter to Talmains. So.
I know, obviously people are watching, they're like, okay, we know this answer about Oliver and Guidel Kane. This next one was a lot of fun, though, too, this third question. So, Taylor, I want to throw this one up for us. This one's from Vatha Urasander, also from Reddit, asked, are there other entities besides the Creator and the Dark One, other powers and sources? So this one's kind of it's a deep question. We did have an answer for everyone here, so let's throw that one up from the notes, Taylor. Again, this one's from the Wheel of Time Outline, Book 1. Says, wielders of power discovered the existence of other worlds, other universes. In order to exchange knowledge, they attempted contact with those worlds, but for years all such failed. Then they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams and darkest nightmares. They not only made contact and shared knowledge, but much of the knowledge they received seemed obscure and impossible to use. They were told of a land of peace and plenty, like their own, but too late they discovered the truth. That other world was dying, blighted by the evil uses to which power had been put, corrupted to the point where even powers could sustain life only in the bleakest terms. Now, before we move on, I know you're probably kind of wondering, like, what does this relate to? Terez, do you want to kind of explain, or Linda, feel free to jump in, this outline for Wheel of Time that we're reading from, do we know what year this was from when he was writing this?
I think it's like 1985 or so.
Or even maybe 84. It was really quite early.
Yeah. It's just like he completely and totally reworked how he thought about, the Dark One and the power system in general. But this was his earliest thoughts about what it was going to be. This is where it started. So a lot of the questions that kind of maybe don't make sense about the Creator and the Dark One, you can go back and see where he started and see kind of where those things that don't make sense came from. I don't know.
Well, that's what I love about his answer here is that you can see the foundation for everything he did end up using. And we can continue talking about this. Let's finish that one off, Taylor. Can you put the previous one back up just really quickly? And it says, worse, the knowledge they had given enabled the lords of that other world to break into the world of our story. And then he, in parentheses, he said, should these have source more evil than merely lords? And then it says, the greatest and most vicious of those lords was Sakan. The armies that followed him came to be known as the Forsaken, men, half men, and not men twisted without souls. And then in parentheses he writes, get a good name for Sakan's lieutenants. And he says, a war of powers ensued, blasting the earth. A man named, and he left that blank, and called the dragon, was the leader of humankind in the war. This does go on. For those of you who are kind of curious, he details even more and starts to build out some of the story that we know to be the books. Anything that strikes you from this, Linda, things that you liked about is this Lord Sakan coming from another world? What did you like about his foundational, or what were your thoughts here?
Some of my thoughts are around, like, his early visions were both strongly influenced by Arthurian myth, but also by the Lord of the Rings. And this one struck me as kind of Lord of the Rings-like, with multiple bad guys, basically. So, I mean, that's kind of what I think about it.
Yeah, like Sakan from another world, and he brings the Forsaken. You can see the elements of the blight here coming in, and you can
and what I call the half men.
The Trollocs.
Yes,
Yeah,
or
the
and
meaning of
perhaps
Shadow
and
Spawn
perhaps
generated.
grey men, because without souls, that's probably the grey men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Or
it sounds
he
like
split that idea into two. He has twisted not men and grey men.
notice he said Forsaken, and then he said the Dark One's lieutenants need a name. So that was interesting. I wonder if that was like Dreadlords eventually, or he swapped that up a little bit. I don't know.
Or just Dark Friends, really.
Or just Dark Friends, yeah.
And Shadow Spawn. Probably Shadow Spawn, maybe. Because Murdral are considered Shadow Spawn.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Thanks, Terez, for noting 1984. Yeah, that 1984, 1985. That's right. I noticed the note that I had about these quotes. Yeah, this is when some of these earliest ideas were out there, and I think this is definitely a place that we could go and talk about in a kind of a future episode. We could probably dig into some of that explanation and just kind of start maybe combining the oldest with what we currently have and kind of see where he goes with that story. But yeah, let's jump to this next question from fans. This one's from Alexander8, also I believe from Reddit, if I remember correctly. He was wondering how Kalendor was made. I think I remember reading that Brandon said RJ had notes about how Kalendor was made, but at the time Brandon didn't want to say anything because it might be included in the companion. However, looking at the companion and the Watt wiki, there aren't any great details on how it was made or why it's able to amplify the true power. All that we know is that it was made during the end of the War of Power and was discovered to have a flaw. And I guess this is a good time to say, if you're here, there might be spoilers. I didn't say that at the beginning. But I'm assuming if you're here talking about the books and here for fan questions, you already know that. But now you know there may be incidental spoilers as we go through these. And this question didn't really have an answer in the notes, per se. But there was one thing that we wanted to bring to everyone's attention. I think it was from an interview. So let's see this first answer, Taylor. Jason Wolfbrother at a Knife of Dreams signing report asked Robert Jordan about Kalendor, was it used in the War of Power? And Robert Jordan said, yes, that is how the flaw was discovered. And then he asked, why didn't they ward or buffer Kalendor? And then Robert Jordan replied, the flaw with Kalendor is simply a manufacturing flaw. And he went on to talk about how they were at the end of their tech age with only a few show wings and Jokars left. A couple of shock lances were still around, but they were not as prevalent as they had been. Anyway, they had been mass-producing Terangreal, Angreal, and Sangreal, and there are bound to be flaws with the products. The flaw with Kalendor is simply one such flaw. That seemed kind of... it's kind of known, I guess, to fans, but clearly people still kind of are curious about this idea of Kalendor being a flaw. Did you find anything else, or do you remember anything else from the notes to both of you about Kalendor? I mean, I looked and I didn't really see anything like that he was really talking about it, other than what he planned to do with it in the Stone of Tyr. But he doesn't really talk anymore.
Not in the
about it.
notes, no. I mean, there was also the implication in that last duel with Moradin that Kalendor was actually going to be designed to catch Forsaken, basically, because they'd be tempted by using the true power with it, and once they do that, they can be taken.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
We did have a second part here in this quote. Taylor, you want to throw that quote up? It's for the second. Oh, I only have that first one. That's right. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think that was the only thing we had found.
That and the fact that it was Kalendor was the only Terangreal they know of that Sa'angreal that was also a weapon. And
I love that it was, at least Jordan told us that it was used in the War of Power. You know, knowing that aspect of it. Because I think sometimes people think, no, it was made and kept, apart. So, any other notes on Kalendor before we move on to the next question?
No, none from me.
Okay.
I just wanted to say that
it.
it was one of those things that we were curious about and we searched for, and there just wasn't anything.
No, that's right.
Like there might be something in the extra super special notes that Brandon had, but
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is don't give up hope on your questions per se, because this is only the note that we can't find any, but that doesn't mean someday in the future there might not be more to be heard.
It's a long wait, Matt.
It's a long wait. That's true. Now, this fifth question, let's jump to that, Taylor. This is from Eben Hopwell. Do we know who Brigitta's rebirth is supposed to be? I think she will be one of Melane's twins. Since she was at term during the last battle, and the future cooperation asking channelers would certainly put her in contact with Guidel, who is Jurgrady's son. Unfortunately, Evan, there isn't anything from the notes here. But I know that, Terez, you had mentioned this to me. It was a conversation you were having with Brandon about specifically to Guidel being one of Jurgrady's son. Do you want to give us a summary of what happened in that conversation? I know the people can look it up in like the Theoryland interview database if they want to read the whole thing.
Oh yeah, I just, he started dropping hints that he had made Guidel Jurgrady's son, and as soon as he did that, we went and looked it up, and he was 4 years old at the time that Guidel was spun out, so he was too old. And we wondered, like, maybe if Brandon had missed that detail. And he never confessed to having missed it, but I think he might have. So we started asking him maybe if Grady has another son, which from the way he wrote the scene about that, it doesn't seem very likely he had that in mind, but he kind of started to roll with that after a while. So
yeah, if you want to go look it up again, you can go to the Theoryland interview database and look that up, see the conversation that Terez had with Brandon. But yeah, I think he said something like, yes, Jurgrady has multiple children or something like that.
Yes.
It's
he was trying to dodge the question. I'm like, I was determined to pin him down on that one because it was starting to get on my nerves.
Yeah, and that was funny. And he did actually, in the interview that I did with him, I don't have the clip here, but the interview I did with him in April, he did say that he, regardless of what he planned to do initially, that he did plant that other child in the story, leaving it basically to Team Jordan to decide if that was going to become canon. So it's not like a total answer yet, but the idea is that is supposed to be, at least Brandon's kind of throwing that up as that's who I believe Guidel is, basically. But it still isn't part of actual canon from the books that it is Guidel Reborn. So for those of you kind of wondering if it is an answer, technically it's not part of the canon yet. So let's jump into the sixth question. This was a fun one.
Did we even touch on the question about Brigitta, though? Like who she is?
No, just that we didn't have an answer. Yeah, just that we don't have an answer. But yeah, so go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we made it clear that there wasn't anything in the notes about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good callback on that. Yeah, there was not anything about her, who she was. Again, this goes to Terez's point. We just might not have access to those notes. Maybe there's something in the stuff that Brandon had access to.
But honestly, to me, that feels like the kind of thing that RJ wouldn't have bothered to write about.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I think I want to say that I did look this up, and that Brandon, it might have been in kind of the collection of research we were doing, but Brandon mentioned that there were two kind of portions of notes, and this is also in the interview database, he talks about that, but I think he is saying between 100 and 200 pages of notes that we probably don't have access to, that were related to notes that Maria and Alan were putting together through things that Robert Jordan wanted to there. That
includes everything that he had written. So all of his draft scenes are part of that and take up a huge part of the page count.
Do they? Okay. So so for those of you kind of curious what other notes that Brandon might have had access to, there are, maybe 100 to 200 pages of notes, and it has to do, like Terez just said, it's stuff that Robert Jordan wrote, actual scenes, but then it's also notes that Maria and Alan kind of kept, I want to say, from things that he said should happen, kind of just random comments versus actual scenes written. So let's jump to the sixth question, which I think is a lot of fun. Alman Bunt on Twitter asked, a question for the researchers: what is the most interesting or your favorite discarded plot or character from the notes? So I'm going to go to you, Linda, first, give you a chance here.
Okay.
What's your favorite kind of discarded plot, or just something you found in the notes that you thought is pretty great?
There's this line in the notes that says, people who will go over to Shatan or be taken by him. Galad, Nynaeve. I found that very interesting for obvious reasons. Galad, he developed in an entirely different direction. He became, during the books, less of an extremist, and so he became a lot better a person and a leader. Nynaeve, however, her becoming a Forsaken or a Dreadlord, that was actually used in the last book, in Rand's Duel with the Dark One. It's in the chapter of the last battle, where the Dark One's little world, her eyes are wrong, so she's been turned, and she's basically a chosen, and no one remembers what good is anymore. So yeah, it was they actually used that, which was to me very interesting, knowing what I knew that was in the notes.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we're going to talk a little bit about one of those people, Galad, here shortly.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, and then to you, Terez, was there one that always comes to mind, one of your favorites in the notes, of something that was just discarded?
Yeah, something that I'm pretty sure RJ was going to do, but Brandon ditched, is the whole plot line where Egwene ends up with Galad. Because he promises Gawain to take care of his baby. And Egwene was supposed to be pregnant at the end, and Gawain dies, and Galad promises Gawain to take care of his baby. And it's all over the notes, how, Galad is attracted to Egwene and, feels uncomfortable about acting on his attraction and always putting duty first. And then Gawain gets in the way. So he's not going to get between Gawain and a woman, that's for sure. So that was like, he totally shipped them. They were totally going to end up together. And then Brandon decided that Egwene needed to die, so that didn't happen.
I'm waiting for to see the responses in chat about this. Yeah, that one is there's a whole discussion there of the memory of light outline, and I think that'd be fun to come back again for another episode and talk about that one. Yeah. And this is going to be a pretty big topic, just generally speaking about Galad. One of my favorites discarded is. I don't have the exact quotes or anything, but it was when he actually did take or thought about having Rand go off and become a beggar. He actually, there's it talks about it kind of like prophecies in the books and such like that. But there is this whole notion at one point, Jordan was thinking about where he'd go off and he actually would be gone for a while and then come back into the story later on. And I thought that was interesting, and that's another piece I think we can go back to and cover when we cover those early ideas that he had. But that's one of my favorites because I don't know, for me it's always one of those where it's that makes so much sense of what's in the books that never happened, but he left a little piece of that in the books, if you will. So that's a fun question. Really appreciate that question. This next one, question 7, this is from Wasson. On Twitter, said, is there anything in the notes mentioning about future ages? We know a bit about the first 3, but pretty much nothing about the other 4. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but from what we saw, there is nothing in the notes about future ages. Were there any? Did you hear any hints to the two of you? Was there anything else about previous ages that you found interesting? The second age or first age that maybe was in the notes but didn't ever end up in the books. Do you recall anything like that?
I was just waiting for Terez. What I saw was, he says in an interview, there is some flow both ways between ages, because you can look both ways along a wheel. So you get little glimpses of certainly the second age and some mentions of the first age. But then there's this sentence in the notes, the wheel puts the threads where it wills, and the truth of what happened is hidden in the pattern beyond the hope of mortal eyes to see. So it's almost like there's only a limited amount of leakage between ages, and that's the proper way it should be.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah. So, he didn't elaborate.
Is there anything that comes to mind to you, Terez, that is a part of the second age or first age? Anything that he says that didn't maybe end up in the books that would be interesting to note?
Yeah, there were a few things about the Forsaken, and as to why we didn't look this up. This is where I apologize for being sick for a month, which is also why I look terrible tonight. But yeah, I can't really nail down anything specific in my head right now.
Yeah, there was one I think I can't remember if I actually quoted this in a previous episode we did, but it was this idea of at least the first age. He does at one point talk about the first age ending
in fire.
In fire,
Right.
yeah.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people are like, oh, it's just nuclear war or something like that, but it almost suggested a little bit more sci-fi-ish, futuristic, I don't know, I almost like space battle kind of thing. I don't know. That's how I read that. That introduction, like there was actually something happening in space that came back and affected the world. But that's, yeah, go ahead.
I put that quote in Google Doc because I was trying to track how files changed over time, and that particular fire quote changed like 3 or 4 times, and I have like every iteration of it in a file.
Yeah.
He never actually cited that, but you could tell it did. I mean, the closest he got was talking about, I think, just how the age ended basically in an apocalypse, and that was after the channeling was basically discovered. So makes you wonder what it had involved there. But yeah, we don't get much about the first age either, for those of you who are kind of curious.
I mean, he also said that some ages ended in ice. So
Did he say that? I don't remember that one. Okay.
Yeah. Ages ending in fire or ice or yeah.
Okay, so that's
it was just vague though, so it's not really anything to go on, Matt. So
no, well,
that's why I didn't quote it.
It's a word to go on.
Thing.
That's fine. Now, just as a reminder, everybody, this is a live call and talk show. We'd love to have you give us a call if you're kind of curious about any of the answers we've given up so far for the show. Feel free to give us a call at 1-313-825-5968. That's 1-313-825-5968. If you have a question that we haven't covered, like I said, we're not going to be able to get to every one. We didn't have time to research every single question that was submitted, but we're happy to kind of cover anything you want to ask us about the notes. If you're curious, if we have a recollection of seeing something, or like I said, if you don't hear your question tonight, just give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about these. This next question here is question number 8. And this is also from Alman Bunt on Twitter. It said, did RJ ever have plans or notes about the relationship between Rand and Galad, and if it was to carry greater plot weight? Great question. This one I actually thought was going to be a lot of fun. We did a lot of putting together notes about this topic. I'm going to read you one quote, and there's a lot more, but I want to read you this one quote, and then we can talk about what we hope to plan to do here with another episode. So let's give you this. This is from the Eye of the World notes file, notes on books 2 through 6. This is a portion of that note. Says, after Rand decides that he is indeed the dragon, his first ally will be Morghese, who will become his lover for a time. This makes Galad his bitter opponent, and eventually sends Galad over to Shatan, which I think is a great... to unpack that one, I feel like would take us a bunch of time, which is Rand and Morghese, and becoming a lover there, and then also Galad, because of this relationship, going over to Shatan. And I don't know if there's anything more. I know we talked about this, and for those of you that are watching or are hopeful, I did see Matilde Rosero in chat. She was excited. Matilda was excited about this idea that we might talk about Galad. I think there's enough, and I think the three of us are agreed that there's enough to really talk about him in a separate episode, and basically talk about the character kind of plot arc for Galad. So I think that's going to be our next episode, was what we were thinking. For those that are watching, we'll come back and actually talk about his plot arc. But is there something else? I mean, and you brought this up. I feel like we've mentioned Galad a couple times. Terez, you mentioned from the Memory of Light outline, and then Linda, you mentioned from basically from the notes.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not. By the way, it's not just the Memory of Light outline.
Oh,
So
okay.
that does indicate that it wasn't Robert Jordan who changed it, because it was still there in the memory of outline that Alan and Maria made up for Brandon. So that's the only reason why we know that Brandon was the one who changed it. But it's also in the Galad file about his last conversation with Gawain, what that was supposed to be about. So yeah, obviously that's a big evolution, but then you go all the way back to the beginning and his character just, it evolved a lot over the years.
Yeah, that's what made it fun. Like as we were putting together, I feel like that had 3 or 4 pages of notes that we were able to extract just that were interesting, but the whole Galad file itself, I want to say, is rather large. And so yeah, I think I'm already seeing a hashtag "Give us Galad" in chat here. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of people that are really excited. Leanne said, "I love the Galad show already." Exactly.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it was one of those where I was like, "Oh man, this whole show could have been a discussion about what we found in the notes about him." So, yeah. Anything else you both want to bring up about that?
I was just going to say that whole Galad sub-thread, that's very strongly influenced by Arthurian myth, which is why it dates back from his earliest time outlines, which were strongly influenced by that mythos. And that this is like that last little bit of it that remained right up until the last 3 books.
Yeah, I can't wait to dig that into that piece with everyone. It's like one of those where I'm like, I'm going to bring up this part about it, but we'll wait until that episode happens. Yeah. Let's bring our first caller into the show, and then we'll get back to some questions here. Megan has a question for us. Hey, Megan, welcome to the Dusty Wheel tonight. How you doing?
Hi, thank you. I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Fantastic. Thank you. So what was your thoughts after listening to the episode, or what question do you have for us?
Okay, so I have a question. It comes from book 6. I am just doing my 3rd read-through of the series, and so I just got to the part where Rand is told that he bears a strong resemblance to Tigraine, and he figures out that that's his birth mother. And so doing some research on all these people and Tigraine's first husband, Terengil, I figured out that Moiraine was Terengil's half-sister. And I was wondering, when Moiraine first met Rand, would she have seen that resemblance to Tigraine and been like, yeah, he's totally not from the Two Rivers. He is Tigraine's son or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. What do you think?
Well, she could have, but Moiraine never gives away information if she can help it. So
that's true.
Yeah,
I didn't know if she would have even met Tigraine to where she would have been able to recognize a resemblance.
The 2 courts would have had some sort of interchange between them. Though, of course, she was off in the White Tower training for, 6 years? 3 years a novice and 3 years elected. That would probably have, but that was and Morghese was there then, so that was before the marriage, because they only married.
Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out the years, and I couldn't quite figure out if Moiraine would have been at their wedding or anything like that to where she would have met Tigraine.
Yeah,
Morghese wasn't married then.
Okay.
She definitely wouldn't have seen her nearly as often as the Andorans did, Yeah. So they definitely had an intimate familiarity with what she looked like.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
It is a nice question.
Hey, thank you very much, Megan. Appreciate that for calling in.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
So we have a couple more here, people calling in. Let's bring one of them in before we jump on. This is Jack. Let's bring Jack into the show. Hey, Jack, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. How you doing tonight?
Good. How are you guys? Happy pre-Thanksgiving.
Right? Yeah,
Hi,
this
Jack.
is a great way to spend Thanksgiving Eve, if you will. So, so what's your thoughts?
I wanted to thank you again for having this show. You guys are awesome. So I wanted to ask if in RJ's notes, if it was different when Matt went into through to see the Aethelin, if there were any differences from how Brandon portrayed it, or if there were anything significant in the notes about them that weren't put in the books.
If you're talking about when he went to the Tower of Genji or Genji or however you pronounce it, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yes. Robert Jordan actually wrote a significant portion of that entire sequence. That's one of the few things that he did write. And of course, everything that he left was in draft form, so Brandon had to tweak it a lot. And, a lot of it's going to come across in his style for that reason. Like, he deliberately tried to make things match, especially when, there were gaps that needed to be filled in. But since he wrote most of that, I think it's pretty safe to say that that's essentially how he wanted it to be portrayed, with maybe the exception of a few small details. And there's nothing in the notes about it that we saw.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, one second, Jack. Was there I know you had a second question there, which is, do you recall anything about the Eilfin and Aelfin from the notes that's of note here? I know he was kind of curious. Is there anything in the notes about them?
Yes, there is, Matt. While Terez was speaking, I ducked off over to my Eilfin essays.
Nice.
In his Matt notes, RJ explored the idea of the Eilfin stealing the nourishment out of human food as pixies or fairies do, so that humans could starve to death in their realm while they're stuffing their faces. Conversely, the Eilfin could offer humans what look like proper human food, but it isn't nourishing. So, but he used that idea instead in the rules of Telar and Riod, where you can create food or drink, but it's not going to nourish you.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Good. No, thank you for looking that up. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jack, for calling in, man. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, you guys have a great night. Bye.
You too.
Thank
Bye.
you. You too.
So we have 2 more calls online, but let's jump into one of these other questions, and then we'll get to the calls. This next question is question number 9. Hey, Taylor, can you throw up question number 9 for us? This one came from Brother Buddha on Twitter, and he asked, did RJ base his characterizations of certain people who have suffered too much and seem to be showing signs of PTSD off of his lived experience in the Vietnam War, such as some of the war-ravaged people on Toman Head and Almoth Plain in The Great Hunt? So this one doesn't have necessarily an answer in the notes, but we did want to highlight some answers that Robert Jordan gave in interviews. And I thought these seemed pretty relevant. So let me just go through these. This first one, when he was asked about his military experience, what his military experience might have related to when he had Rand looking into the face of one of the maidens after she had died, protecting him from an attack, and as he tried to memorize her face. And Robert Jordan said, well, some of it did. I suppose actually that particular thing came from the only time I was really shaken in combat in shooting at somebody or shooting at somebody. I was shooting back at some people on a sampan, and a woman came out and pulled up an AK-47, and I didn't hesitate about shooting her. But that stuck with me. I was raised in a very old-fashioned sort of way. You don't hurt women. You don't do that. That's the one thing that stuck with me for a long, long time. And then in addition to this about the Vietnam War, he had a second answer here a couple years later. And Taylor, you want to give me that second one? And this one was from the Walden Books interview in 1998. This was 4 years after that answer. Also reflecting about a question having to do with Vietnam and his war experience. And he said, it really doesn't reflect any of my own experiences, except that I know what it's like to have someone wanting to kill you. I don't try to write about Vietnam. I thought I would once, but now I don't believe I could make myself. But I know the confusion, uncertainty, and outright ignorance of anything you can't see that exists once the fighting starts. I don't think war will ever become sufficiently high-tech to completely dispel the fog of war. So I can put these sensations into my writing. And this last one that I thought was relevant, this one was in 1991. And it also, in addition to answering a question about his war experience, he said, I do think the military characters in my fantasy novels are more realistic in terms of how soldiers really are, how they feel about combat, about being soldiers, about civilians. Beyond that, my time in Vietnam certainly has affected a certain moral vision, not just based on what happened to me, but on the abandonment of a people who had put everything on the line for us. It started me off on a quest for morality, both in religious and philosophical reading and in my writing. Again, one of the central themes in the Wheel of Time is the struggle between the forces of good and evil. How far can one go in fighting evil before becoming like evil itself? Or do you maintain your purity at the cost of evil's victory? I'm fond of saying that if the answer is too easy, you've probably asked the wrong question. To me, these answers are really touching, and they really explain very much about those sequences dealing with war in the books. And so I've come to really respect that aspect of his writing and how he writes war. Was there anything that kind of stood out to both of you in those quotes when it comes to how his experience in the wars led to his writing?
There's another quote that he talks about how he became the Iceman, and that reminds me of Rand trying to make himself harder and colder, and so there are direct influences like that. But I think those three quotes really sum it up so nicely.
Well, I mean, a lot of times the fans will talk about that, like, I hate Rand's obsession, and like I hate that this bothers him, and that he's doing
his
this.
list.
His list,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
I hate that, but it's really interesting just how much I think there is personally of Robert Jordan in the books, and how he does lend some of these things to the characters he writes. I thought that was a good one to bring up, even though it wasn't in the notes per se, but I thought it was really a really nice answer, at least, to that question. So thanks, Brother Bruto, for asking that. Why don't we bring in our next guest of the show? It's Master of the Deck. Hey, Master of the Deck, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. How are y'all?
Fantastic. So what's your thoughts? What are your questions?
Well, it's hard to follow up that last one. That's my favorite one so far. But I had a question about the golem. I always found the golem to be sort of fascinating as a character, not just as a creature. And I kind of wondered about the conclusion of the Matt and Golem conflict. How much of that was Brandon kind of taking the story and running with it? Or did Robert Jordan leave notes for that specifically? Did he have plans for the golem that were exactly that, or beyond that, or anything else?
I don't remember seeing anything about it. That doesn't mean there isn't anything, but it does probably mean that there isn't anything huge. I would have to look into it again.
I think that's the golem's fate was outlined in the directives for whoever would come after Robert Jordan to write the books, and that that's not going to see the light of day until 2037, if then.
Yeah,
that's not anything. That's all entirely held over, I'm sure, if there was anything, and there would be. But the only thing I can add to that is that Brandon, he did say that he wasn't going to invent weaves, that he would use what weaves had already been developed by Robert Jordan to do whatever battling was going to be done, and I assume the golem would be one of those. And the other change he made, Brandon himself definitely made the change where the golem could pass through a gateway and not shrivel up or die immediately. So that was definitely Brandon. He decided that the golem should be a sort of super creature that didn't have the other Shadow Spawn's weaknesses because of its way it can absorb weaves.
Is there anything else, golem from the notes itself? I haven't. I didn't look about the golem.
Anything. There's nothing there that I've
There's nothing
found.
there like foundational.
No.
Okay.
No.
So, Master Deck, I don't know if that answered your question or kind of gave you what you're hoping for there, but that's all we could find.
Whenever anybody brings up the golem,
especially off the cuff, that's impressive.
Whenever anybody brings up the golem, I always want to talk about Dominique's theory about it, which was that Samael controlled the golem, and he said it after Herod fell because he thought that Herod fell was Asmodean in disguise.
Oh, I like that. That's a good. I like that. I like that one. Well,
I like that theory too.
Well, have a good evening. Thank you for giving us a call. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Bye.
Bye. To the question from John in chat here, he said, "Why 2037?" That's just the year that they've set.
They chose. It'll be X years from when they set it all up. 20 years or something like that.
And it's not, I would imagine they could go and change that, right?
It's probably just...
Yeah, I'm sure the library would be quite happy to release them sooner. because of their philosophy of their whole being is centered around disseminating knowledge to people.
It's just 40 years after.
Yeah, that's right.
40 years after Robert Jordan died. So they probably just picked that as sort of an arbitrary date.
Yeah. So as of now, it's 2037, but they could actually extend that, right? They could change it to 2050.
They could do whatever though.
Right.
But the library won't change that. They'll stick to the original thing, or release them sooner if that's decreed by Robert Jordan's legacies.
Oh, are those? And maybe this is a total side conversation, but so those dates are set. In other words, those can't be changed by the person that donates them to the library or whatever. In other words, they can't come back and say.
Well, they probably could. The legacies could, but the library can't. It's not the library.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. Okay, I thought you were saying that maybe it was like a kind of a concrete, set deal. So, why don't we? I think let's tackle this next question, then we'll take the next call. So this question, number 10 here. This was from Dominic Body on Twitter, and said, "Is there any more about the Cambriat? I was disappointed when even the encyclopedia didn't expand on it." And unfortunately, there's not. No. Unfortunately, like I want to say, half of the questions people asked were kind of like there's not really anything in the notes per se. A lot of those things had to do with a lot of the notes, at least in how I view them, I feel a lot to do with foundational ideas that a lot of the intervention that Jordan came up with later didn't seem to really kind of get in the notes, and he didn't detail them, at least the notes we have. So let's jump to this next call. Emerald is on the line. Let's bring Emerald. Emerald, welcome to the Dusty Wheel. How are you doing tonight?
Hello, I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Fantastic. So what's your question?
My question is, was there anything in the notes that expanded on Luke and Isom? Because I'm so intrigued by that pairing and the way that they seem to work, and just with no explanation for how that came to be. And I'm just sort of dying to know.
Yeah, that's a great question. Terez, Linda, anything else about Luke and Isom?
I didn't see anything else in the notes. And what is worth pointing out is that the whole idea of the town and the blight was a secret that Robert Jordan kept until his deathbed, like literally his deathbed. And he's like, I gotta tell you guys about this. And Wilson has told that story a couple of times at Jordan Con and other places. So yeah, I didn't see anything particularly interesting in the notes. Did you, Linda?
No, I'm checking through the relevant article I've got here, and no, there was not. I didn't think so, but I've double checked. So no.
I know, right? I know. Yeah, I feel your pain.
I agree
pure
with Emerald.
torture, but there we are. Yeah, it is torture, but no.
I mean, the whole blood calls blood prophecy, and just like the whole mystique of those two characters and how they were related to Rand and Lan, maybe it was just all in his head. Like when you hear about stuff like the town story that Wilson tells you, you have to wonder how much of it was just in his head, and he didn't write it down because
he knew he'd never forget it. He
didn't want anybody to see
that
it.
He needed to remember. Yeah.
I've never heard that story.
Really? Yeah. We'll have to look it up and post it for you later. Are you in the Discord server?
I am.
You are? Okay, good. I'll look it up and I'll post it for you later. In the Discord server.
Thank you.
Yeah, Emerald, thank you so much. Yeah, I appreciate you calling. For that
Have a good Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and Terez, thanks for bringing that up. If you do have questions after the show, we typically do an after show over in Discord. We continue this conversation. If we're over there after this one and you still have a question, you're still kind of curious about things, again, we can continue looking up a lot of these things. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that we want to know as fans, there's just not that much more about them. But every once in a while, like the question about Galad, there is a lot, right? And we can have a lot of fun and kind of dig into that, which we will in another episode. So don't stop asking the questions. Please keep asking them. I just feel bad every once in a while. I feel bad because it's I feel Emerald's pain, everybody else's pain of like, oh man, shoot, he did write so much and he left so much, but there's always that one additional question we'd love to know a little bit more about. So let me bring in our next caller. It's Malkir Talks.
Hello.
There we go. Hey, Rob.
Hey,
sorry.
how's it going?
Just took a second. Welcome, Rob. How you doing, man?
No worries. I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Good. So what's your question?
So my question's about Kalendor. So to create an Angreal, you need a seed, and you need to use that to pour power into the object, and that weakens the channeler in the process. But I'm curious who allowed access to the true power to make it a true power Angreal as well, because the true power only comes from the Dark One. He's the one that controls your access to it. So was there anything in the notes about how that was built into Kalendor?
Not at all. What we told you about in Kalendor, that's it.
Just the fact that, and it is interesting. It's not clear if they call it a manufacturing flaw, and they make it sound. He made it sound very kind of
mechanical, like a factory.
Yeah, he made it sound like a factory versus.
I think he even mentioned the word manufacturing. Yeah, factory.
Yeah, exactly.
But,
so we don't know exactly that question. I think it's a good theory as far as it lacked a buffer per se, but how the true power aspect to it came to be. Yeah, we just get to theorize, which is fun. We get to hold on to those theories for the rest of our lives because no good answer.
I'll have to do an episode on it.
Yeah, exactly. You should. Absolutely. Any other questions you had? Since we weren't able to give you anything about Kalendor, is there anything else you're curious about before we let you go?
No, the only other one that I was really curious about was the Golem, and Master of the Deck got there first, so no worries.
Yeah, that's pretty top. That's a pretty popular one to ask about for sure. Hey, Rob, thank you very much for calling in, man, and have a good night. I'll talk to you soon.
Morning. Have a good morning.
Bye.
Yeah, morning. Exactly.
Oh, it's still in the middle of the night there.
Yeah, what is it? I think it's
about 3 a.m.
2 or 3. So appreciate you, Rob, staying up with us and asking us about that. So, I think that's when I think about some of the top topics. I would love to have known more about Luke and Isam. The Golem would have been a really interesting note, and a lot of these things, like you pointed out, Terez, it's almost like they just lived in his head. Yeah, and he just never wrote about them, because why wouldn't he have written about them? I mean, we talked about how a lot of these things in like The Great Hunt never really show up in the notes that he eventually invents, basically.
Like, Maria had access to his notes, and sometimes I wonder if he was hiding stuff from her. But like, he could have had a separate thing that she didn't have access to or something. I don't know. Because he didn't let her read the notes for like a few years after she started working for him.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he didn't want her to get spoiled, and it just made her job difficult. So finally, he let her have access to his notes so that she could help him better. And that's when she says she dug in and looked for something about Varen.
Right. I know that story now. Yeah.
Obviously, you didn't ask enough questions, Matt, at all those book signings.
Right. Well, that's the funny thing
you asked the wrong questions, as he would say.
You mean about Asmodean? Yeah. Too many questions about Asmodean.
For stuff like the town that he thought might have unnecessarily spoiled her, he might have kept that separate. But the way Wilson told it, it was just in his head. He didn't write it down anywhere. So I have no idea.
Now, we'll tackle this 11th question here, but I did want to bring this one up from Andrew in chat. He's saying, anything in the notes about Wolf Brothers or that power, that ability? Do either of you remember anything about Wolf Brothers?
There was a little bit. I'd have to look that up.
Okay. These additional questions that people have, we'll try to post some of these in Discord and share them around social media as we have them, or we'll just do another show and we'll talk about.
Just add them to our list.
We'll add it to your list. We'll add it to the list of things that we'll continue talking about. So that's a good question. Let's do this 11th one. This one's kind of fun. So Taylor, you want to throw up the 11th question here? This is from Third Age Art, and Third Age Art asks, curious how much Padan Fane changed from his notes to the page. And there's not really a lot in the notes about Padan Fane's role in the later books, but in the earlier books it includes a little bit about what was changed. For example, this one that we'll show you, initially Fane was he was going to threaten Rand in this way. So let's throw that quote up here. This one, it says, as they are leaving, Barthanes draws Rand aside, says he has a message for Rand, that he was told how to recognize him by looks and sword. And Fane basically says, I will blow the horn and the world will finally be mine. Follow me to Toman Head if you dare. Rand denies knowing what he's talking about. B seems uneasy about Fane, whom he does not name. So this idea that Fane was threatening to blow the horn was not what ends up in the books, right? He ends up threatening his family. That's what he ends up doing.
He couldn't even open the box of his own accord.
Yeah, well, exactly.
That's not to say he wouldn't make the threat, because, he's a liar.
But yeah, it was an interesting thing to kind of brought up, I think.
Yeah.
And then there's this second quote. We weren't able to find, we saw this quote a couple times and forgot to note down where we saw it. And unfortunately, searching the notes is a bit more difficult than we might imagine. So we'll come back and actually cite where this one's at. But in the notes, it says, remember Fane's new abilities, including inducing waking nightmares and setting traps like the loop that nearly caught Rand. I don't know if you want to speak about that, Terez, why this is kind of controversial when it comes to Jordan mentioning that it was Fane responsible for the loop.
Oh, well, in his early notes, like as he was actually writing The Great Hunt, he said it was Lamphere, which makes a lot of sense because, she wanted to push him to use the power. And that's exactly what he says about it in the notes. He goes into this whole explanation about why Lamphere did it. And then later, I guess he changed his mind and wanted it to be Fane.
Or he just forgot that he'd made it Lamphere. This time, that sort of things happen.
Yeah,
but one way or the other, who knows?
And it was weird because we only had, for years, all we had was like some, I think there was only one signing report about that where somebody asked him and he told him it was Fane. And it was just like, it was one of those really badly spelled signing reports that you weren't sure if you should trust. Right. But that was all we had, is him saying it was Fane. And then when we got the notes, we saw that it was Fane, but that it had changed, and earlier it had been Lamphere. So
yeah, I like the earlier answer better.
I do too, honestly.
I prefer the Lamphere answer to this, but this goes to show you, and that's why when we talk about the notes, hopefully those that have watched the previous 3 episodes, if you haven't, you should go watch them. They're a lot of fun, probably lots of stuff you haven't heard before. But basically, you have to remember this stuff is not canon necessarily. This is just kind of earlier thoughts. Sometimes it was stuff that was really, later on in the books. Obviously, he'd written many, many books and wrote these notes. But a lot of the stuff is really early on, kind of initial ideas that he does change in the books themselves. So what we're telling you is not necessarily canon. It's just what can we find that he's written about. So just keep that in mind as you hear these things. I'm not going to put this question up, but somebody asked, for example, there's some of these questions just we could not find in the notes. One of these was, what did Elaine's 2 letters to Rand say exactly? That's not detailed in the notes that we have access to. Again, don't give up hope, if you will, about this kind of thing, but just remember a lot of these things are not in the notes. Now, that is all we had time to kind of cover and really research well for you, other than a lot of the things that we did not find notes on. So next time we'll come back and we'll continue to answer some of these questions. Our next episode will be about Galad, but we'll come back and do another fan questions. We have plenty here, but if you want to continue putting in some questions that you didn't hear us cover now, concerned that maybe we missed one, please feel free to write us on social media, check us in Discord, and we'll again come back and keep doing these episodes. Any final notes about the questions that we got before we let the audience go? To you, Linda or Terez, anything you want to mention before we ended for the night?
No, I've said all I want to say.
Okay.
Can think of to say.
Okay. Excellent. So again, like I said, if we'll come back later in the description and make sure that all the citations are correct. and just verify those with you. So if you do go and you check into the special collections and you try to go and look up some of these citations, you can find them. So we'll make sure that those links are in the description of the video. And also I'll include some links to the 13th Depository. Linda has excellent resources there. Pretty much anything you want to know about the Wheel of Time, just go to 13th Depository. We'll make sure that link is there. Oh, come on. I will. It's true. So I appreciate that. And yeah, and thank you for everyone that showed up today. I know it was right before the Thanksgiving holiday. Hopefully for those that are celebrating Thanksgiving, you will have a wonderful couple of days to yourself or your family that are with you. And yeah, and again, we'll see you back here next Wednesday for the great meme off, where we're going to pick a finalist. I'm looking forward to that one. I've seen them all. They're pretty hilarious. So, but we'll see you on Discord, like I said, after. Please check us out on Discord. We'll jump in and continue this conversation. You can find that link below also. That being said, please like this video on the way out, and we'll see you over there. Good night from the Dusty Wheel, and as we say around here, smash to black.
If you want news and